there's a lot of tentacles to this story here. Let's tease them out with our friend there, Byrna law enforcement, Josh Schirard. He joins me. Josh, good to see you. I know you've been following this story quite heavily here. Let's start, though, with the National Guard. We actually have a live picture there. This is outside Union Station, right in the heart of D.C. What do you see in this shot right here, Josh?
Yeah, so we've got, traditionally what's called an MRAP, which is an armored vehicle, parked there in front of the building. And, this is really kind of indicative of what the National Guard has really been employed to do. When we first heard that they were going to be out there, we really weren't sure what their role was going to be. The D.C. National Guard is in a very unique spot as opposed to some of the other military forces. So posse comitatus doesn't allow federal military to be used in law enforcement functions. So traditionally, your Army, Navy, Marine Corps, all that, they cannot be used as law enforcement. Now, normally National Guard would take that role for the states because they work for the governor. But D.C. is the only district where the National Guard is controlled by a federal entity already. So now you have a federal hand that's allowing these soldiers to do law enforcement work. So they're fully vested and fully able to perform law enforcement functions. But what we've seen over the past 3 days is a little bit of a dialing back from that. Really, they are just performing security functions, static post functions in federal property, just like we saw in Los Angeles. So really not quite the flex we thought we were going to see, which I think, in all honesty, at this point in time is needed. Now, that role could change very quickly if needed, but having them there to protect those federal properties allows those normal gun toters, those guys with guns and badges, guys and girls with guns and badges, to go out there and really do the heavy lifting on the law enforcement work.
I think it's important to make the distinction. National Guard troops, Josh, can they arrest and detain anyone or no?
So technically, yes. So because these National Guard troops, once again, don't fall under posse comitatus, they have law enforcement function. They can do traffic checkpoints. They can do crowd control. They can do riot response. And they do have the power to detain and arrest on a temporary basis. So what does that look like practically? They could, if they, on view, what we call on view, if they see somebody violating a law, they can go put hands on them, detain them, keep them there while, an actual badged law enforcement officer, be it federal or state or city, gets over there to continue that arrest. But they do have that power. Now, once again, I don't think that they're exercising it or their mission is to exercise it at this particular point, but always that could change.
Okay, so Josh, we're looking at Union Station. This is in the heart of the nation's capital. We've seen them near the National Mall, near the monuments. Are they deployed to where they need to be, to high crime neighborhoods and parts of the district? Are they being used as effectively as they can?
I think what we're seeing, in all honesty, and mind you, this is speculation, but having done the job for over 2 decades now, if it was me, I would try to hold them in reserve as long as I can. Look, we know that their presence is very, is just throwing fuel on a fire to a lot of DC residents and a lot of people around the country. So having them out in full force at the onset of this, I don't think is the right move. Now, what are they doing? They're doing a very good job protecting those federal properties, allowing those normal police officers that would be doing that job to go out and really kind of, get to that law enforcement function. But what are they also doing? They are very close and at hand, if needed, very quickly, if we do need them to start permeating those high crime areas, those neighborhoods, they're right there ready to do that. So I think this is kind of a very cautious way of, once again, freeing up resources to do other things, to do more law enforcement motivated tasks, but also keeping a good resource at hand.
So, Josh, you mentioned some of the antagonism that is coming their way. Take a look at this. This is going viral, this video put out by FBI Director Kash Patel. This presumably D.C. resident throwing a Subway sandwich at one of these officers, then taking chase. He was later apprehended. Come to find out, this is now a former trial attorney at the Department of Justice. What's he facing, you think? Throwing a sandwich at one of these law enforcement officers and then running away? What penalty does that bring? Do you know?
Well, I don't know if there's a specific statute for assault with a deadly weapon, but right now they are charging him federally with assault on a peace officer. So federally, this carries a charge of up to 8 years in prison because it is a felony. But as much as we make light and a joke out of this, this is a very, very indicative crime of what they're there to do, of what the Trump administration is asking law enforcement to do. Mind you, is this minor? Possibly. Could this incite something more major? Absolutely. Is arresting him a message? You betcha. It allows everybody to know. It's telling everybody, hey, these are the kinds of things we're not going to let slide anymore. This is the kind of stuff that we have to do to secure this district and make it safer, whether it's a crime like this or whether it's something more major, more assaultive, that's directed towards the public. But people have to understand that at this point, at least for the next 30 days, that there's going to be a very, very different environment when it comes to how crimes are arrested and prosecuted in the district. I mean, you heard Judge Janine. She is holding no quarter for anyone that's going to commit crimes, be they with a deli sandwich, a weapon, or anything else in the district, especially for the next 30 days. So let this be a message to everyone there.
But you mentioned adding fuel on the fire, the criticism that is coming to just the very presence of these enhanced law enforcement officers there. Doesn't this take away from that if they have to deal with something like that we're watching right now, kind of on repeat, on loop? They're focused on him. They're not focused on carjackings, armed robberies, et cetera, et cetera.
It absolutely does. Obviously we want those resources to be diverted where they're most useful. And this is something that's not useful, but it is to a certain extent. Are they taking a career criminal off the street? No, this guy's he's been a trial attorney for the DOJ, probably stayed out of trouble most of his life. But like I said, what it's doing is it's sending a message to those would-be criminals to say, ooh, man, we may want to think twice, at least over the next 30 days, or at least until we see, some changes here. We may want to think twice about doing anything. I mean, heck, if they're throwing a guy in jail for a felony that works for the federal government, in jail for a felony that could face up to 8 years in prison, imagine what is going to happen to those they catch that are doing something worse. So, is this a good use of police resources? I'd much rather see them, put away a career criminal. However, the message is very clear.
Okay, I have to ask you about this because there have been reports I was seeing on social media as well. Checkpoints set up, stopping drivers in parts of the Capitol here. Why is that necessary?
Well, for a couple reasons. One, we want to see the presence. That's the whole point. They want to see the presence. But two, what we have to understand is we really don't know the reason for these checkpoints. We understand, we make speculations that it might be to intimidate people, which is obviously, coming from a law enforcement officer, there's no reason to do that. But we don't know what they know. And sometimes it's very difficult for the public to understand that they don't have the full picture on purpose. Look, law enforcement can't give you the full picture. They can't give you the whole strategy behind their enforcement. Because if we did, then we'd never catch anybody. There's so many times as a police officer, PIO, when I was a public information officer, that I'd talk about operations and could only reveal so much because I couldn't give the operation away because I didn't want to tip off bad guys. We don't know if maybe HSI is out there, CBP's out there because they have information that there is a drug kingpin or a human trafficker that they've been following that may be traversing those routes. We just don't know that information. But otherwise, they are looking. They want people to know that they're out there. They're looking for those that are going to break the law, and they're not going to give really any kind of mercy on those that are going to blatantly disrespect the law and think that they can get away with it anymore. It's the little things that you have to look for that give you the bigger picture.
Yeah, to the Trump administration's credit here, I do think FBI Director Patel, U.S. Attorney Pirro, they have been somewhat transparent listing the number of people they have arrested since this all began 48 hours ago. Lastly, Josh, I just want to get your thoughts here. Post by DHS on X with that photo there of these kind of new vehicles by ICE. They say, we will have our country back. Learning today, the D.C. police chief stepping up cooperation between her officers and federal immigration officials as President Trump's law enforcement takeover of the nation's capital took root today. National Guard troops watching over some of the world's most renowned landmarks, and Humvees took up position in front of the busy main train station. The police chief's order establishing that Metropolitan Police Department officers, Josh, may now share information with immigration agencies regarding people not in custody, such as someone involved in a traffic stop or checkpoint. MPD officers may also provide, quote, transportation for federal immigration employees and detained subject, the order states here. So, Josh, we're seeing kind of an easing of the sanctuary status of D.C., aren't we?
Yeah, and this is really just in line with a lot of Trump's policies and this administration's policies with other cities around the country that have wanted to adopt, those sanctuary policies. He's made it very clear that sanctuary cities are going to be deprived of whatever it can be, whether it's funding, whether it's resources, manpower, until they comply with more cooperative agreements with, DHS and CBP and ICE. And I think this is, one of a laundry list of things that are going to get done here in D.C. over the next 30 days where, hey, they are going to increase that cooperation. These sanctuary cities that are just hamstringing officers' ability and options to have when they encounter illegal aliens is allowing these illegal aliens to be arrested, to get back out, to commit further crime and be a further drain on that community and make that community less safe. This is a way to make sure that they have options to deal with possibly violent offenders or violent criminals down the road and get them detained and get them deported.
Josh, lastly, you can make the argument that the entire crux of immigration enforcement is information sharing between jurisdictions, right?
Yeah, it absolutely is. As a cop, we're here in Texas, obviously huge, massive issues with immigration. And there are a lot of times that we would arrest somebody or detain somebody, and it was clear that they'd committed multiple crimes. Having that option to cooperate and say, hey, ICE, CBP, what can we do to cooperate? This guy, this girl, whoever it is, has been here 3 times, been deported 3 times. How do we get them out? How do we make this community safer? Being able to share that information and that cooperation gave us options to solve a problem. And that's what they're doing here. They're trying to solve a problem. And the only thing that to solve problems is more options to do it, not hamstringing those officers. And the last thing we need to do is dissuade or keep that information sharing from happening between agencies, especially in a place like DC, where there's literally hundreds of agencies that work together in such a small geographic footprint.
All right. Josh Schirard, as always, so informative. We're at the top of the hour. We got to go. Thanks so much for your time. I know we went long.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew.
Okay, here we are, 6 o'clock on the West Coast, 9 o'clock there in the nation.